About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be much fuller if we understood it better. And I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. And Noetic is spelled Noetic. Now, over the course of these programs, we've learned that although the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of now, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects: our normal awareness, the conscious mind, what keeps our body going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, the subconscious mind, and what connects us with our highest ideals and guides us in our actions, the superconscious mind. And we learned that we can change our state of consciousness so we're aware of different aspects of mind at different times. Then we learned that the brain modifies whatever sensory signals it receives to fit past patterns of experience, following a default network in the brain. This means that we perceive, we see, hear, taste, and feel what we expect to experience based on the past. We also saw that our body often responds faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel, and before we're aware of it. Some experiments have even demonstrated that a person's mind continues to take in information and process it for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. Then we learned that no one has yet been able to pinpoint how ideas and thoughts are formed in brain tissue. Based on all this, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is in fact the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body, including the brain. This field may be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches around the body in what some say is an egg shape, extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of energy that exists whether the body is functioning or not, and permeates and develops with the body and the brain. The brain, therefore, is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the organs and senses and transmitting them to the body and sometimes the mind. We've learned that this field of mind affects energy and matter in the body and around it. Experiments in quantum physics demonstrate that the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as either matter or energy depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. People's bodies and their pets have been observed to change when someone they're connected with simply turns attention their way. Individuals have changed the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens or printouts, and the collective human mind changes the readouts from random number generators on the network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibration that's different from other fields, and they vibrate along similar patterns. resonating with each other. So some minds affect other minds across space and time. And we've learned from a growing number of scientists who are seeing our individual mind as part of a larger field of resonance and equating mind with the quantum field or zero-point field out of which all matter and energy arises. Some researchers are going further and using the equations of quantum mechanics and relativity and computer learning algorithms to describe the role of consciousness in the formation of matter. Through all these understandings, we can begin to explain things like the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on how we can access information that is not available to the individual through insight, intuition, and channeling, how dreams affect ourselves, our bodies, and people around us, how music affects the brain and the body and connects us with other minds, how we can enhance or slow down healing through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations, explaining how the belief in a treatment can help a patient experience healing through the placebo effect. We understand more of how remote viewing and even telekinesis can work, and how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync, maximizing our effectiveness. And we're beginning to understand how the two hemispheres of our brain are involved in the information we receive from the world and from our mind. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll find links to the clips, books, and authors that I mention on the show. Today, I want to talk about how the brain affects the body, and vice versa. I'm going to be working initially from an article that is posted on nature.com. Nature is sort of the ultimate science magazine where everyone hopes to get published, and maybe gets published once or twice in their life. Well, the online version offers some marvelous, marvelous articles, and this one is called Brain and Body Are More Intertwined Than We Knew. It's a fairly recent article. So about 20 years ago, a bunch of people have started to ask the question, is the brain isolated from the body? And they started seeing a lot of conditions associated with changes elsewhere in the body. The changes in the makeup of microorganisms resident in the gut, for example, have been linked to disorders such as Parkinson's disease. And some researchers think that certain infections affect and may be provoking the onset of Alzheimer's disease. Just two immediate and recent, very important studies. But the effect goes both ways. Symptoms in the body that haven't historically been seen as related to the nervous system and the brain seem to be happening more and more connected. For example, the development of a fever is influenced not just by the presence of a bacterium, but by a population of neurons that control body temperature and appetite. So the effect of the brain on the body can even be demonstrated in, well, can I heat my body and reduce the temperature of it? And some of it have been exploring that. Evidence is mounting that cancers use the nerves to grow and spread. In recent issue, Michelle Monge, Monge, and her colleagues are showing that some brain cancers actually consolidate neurons with neurons and enhances their progressions. Another one found that neural pathways can cause a drop in blood pressure and fainting. Well, a bunch of us have known that for a long time, that the sudden drop in blood pressure associated with fainting is often related to what the activity of the brain is at the moment. So the interconnectedness of brain and body has all kinds of implications having to do with understanding and treating illness. And some people are beginning to realize that if some of the brain conditions, illnesses, diseases, whatever, start outside the brain, then they can start treating for them much sooner. If they can apply treatments through the digestive system or other organs, it'd be easier and less invasive than to try to cross the blood-brain barrier, which is the brain's first line of defense against all kinds of things that might be happening to it. The other way, is, as we have said before, to use our thinking and feelings to help us manage what's going on in the body. So Nature magazine is finally giving its stamp of approval to those of us who have been working with the brain-body connection for a long time. I'm so glad. But there's more to it than simply this article. So I thought I'd let you hear from some of the folks who are teaching seminars that are later posted on YouTube about the brain and body connection.
How much does it cost to stand upright? Does anyone here have the answer to that question? I'm not too sure anyone has the answer to that question. And besides, could it be that the answer differs based on the individual? In 1978, researchers asked themselves the same question. What they found out was that standing upright increases both heart rate and blood pressure. In 2016, the question is, could it be that how we move, how we learn, and how we think is interconnected? To move better. Are we really in control of our movements? If it's true that we organize movements with the frontal lobe, this is based on how we perceive the environment. And so, would you think that the strategy to move is the same whether we stand on ice, on sand, or in the mud? In 1998, neuroscientist J.P. Roll published on the role of the skin of the foot. What he found out was that we use inputs from the skin of our feet to stand upright and to move. And so, knowing this, how do you think this foot stance contributes to posture? In 1985, a technique entitled posturology was born. And posturology's aim is to stimulate the feet and the eyes with innovative technology and exercises to allow someone to stand upright optimally, and this is the kicker, without them having to actually think about it. These are the types of results achieved by posturologists across the world. These are specifically from Posture Pro, our research center here in Montreal. What you see here is what's possible with posturology. To learn better. How would you say movement and academics are related? Well, movement and academics actually share a common organ. That organ is called the cerebellum. It is postural muscles that are responsible for turning on the cerebellum, and postural muscles are the ones we use to stand upright. So knowing this, when looking at these two individuals, which one do you think benefits from optimal information being sent from their muscles to the cerebellum in order to light up the entire brain? If it's true that the cerebellum turns on the motor areas of the brain, the cerebellum also turns on the language areas. And so what you have to understand is that with a postural imbalance, it's the entire brain that doesn't get lit up to its full potential. And it is both movement and learning that suffer. Now, to turn on postural muscles, one needs to resist a force. And that force is the force of gravity. So the question is, what happens when there's no gravity? In 1999, researchers actually looked at that. What they did is they scrutinized 29 different studies looking at 6 different cognitive measures. What they found out was that while in space, cognitive measures actually do appear to be affected. Meanwhile, here on Earth, in 2006, researchers studied the brains of adults with ADHD. What they found out is that there was a particular brain area that was smaller. And that area was for both movement and attention. That area was indeed the frontal lobe. And so, the next time you think of a learning disability, will you be able to think of this versus this? to think better. If it's true that the frontal lobe is really important for movement and learning, it's also critical in how we manage emotions.
That was Matt Boulay in a TED Talk, summarizing the research done by many others. But I think it's really interesting what this TED Talk by Matt Boulay says, that the position we are holding our body in affects our capacity to learn, to focus our attention, to be present in a situation. And this is important stuff, I think. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, a radio show exploring what consciousness is, how it works, and how our lives can be greatly enhanced as we understand it more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, your host, and that sound tells me it's time to look at a book. Answer any questions you email to ruth@noeticmoments.org, and maybe take a look at what's been going on in the news that can help us understand the role that our state of consciousness plays in our experience. There's a marvelous book that takes to a level of practicality that's really very cool. It's called Your Body is Your Brain. The subtitle, Leverage Your Somatic Intelligence to Find Purpose, Build Resistance, Deepen Relationships, and Lead More Powerfully. Amanda Blake is a body worker who has studied a variety of things, and she is aware that there is so much more to our experience than we've ever thought, obviously. And I really appreciate in her introduction what she says about putting this book together. She says that the book came out of a late night inspiration. She realized she had all of these wonderful books and all these ideas, and they were all related, and somehow they all needed to be pulled together. She also had the experience, a particular client. She had this kind of thing pretty often, but she had a particular client who had just had some body work done on her table and came up from the experience going, what just happened? Everything that had seemed to be driving her before was no longer driving her. The pain seemed to be no longer there. All the emotional pain more than the physical pain. Now, anyone who's had a massage is aware that there are often emotional connections to various spots in the body. But somehow during the work that Amanda had done, a whole complex of ideas and shoulds and oughts and compulsions had simply melted away. And Amanda knew she had to write about it. The book has a fairly straightforward table of contents, the introduction. Part 1 is called The Embodied Self, and Chapter 1, Biobehavioral Blind Spots, Vision Restored in Chapter 2. Chapter 3 is Embodied Self-Awareness, and I think that's the key of what she is talking about. Then the rest of the book is application of this embodied self-awareness. So part 2, she says, embody social and emotional intelligence. So section 1 is finding purpose, and the first C's are care, choose, commit, and contribute. Section 2 is build resilience, courage, composure, confidence, and credibility. Section 3 is deepen empathy, connection, and compassion. Section 4 is inspire others, communicate, collaborate, convert conflict to consensus. Part 3 is to become your best self, is to build a better world, and she talks about the promise of embodied learning. She has an appendix on putting it into practice, and then all the usual things. So in Chapter 1, she gives us an example of what's going on. Brian Fippinger sat stunned, chest heaving, arms burning, tears brimming. Quietly he surveyed the scene. The oversized cushion and the long wooden staff he'd been thrashing it with were strewn across the room. The rough-hewn barn rafters absorbed the flickering light of the wood stove. Outside the sliding glass doors, the green hills shone brightly in early morning sun. Brian's two companions sat by, respectfully hushed, as his gaze fell on the one thing and then the other. His friend, Luann, finally broke the silence. She called him Phip. "Phip," she asked gently, "what's going on?" Brian turned to her, his face a mixture of confusion and awe. He paused, taking in the deep navy blue of her jeans. And then, "I can see color," he whispered, shaking his head in amazement. After 53 years of black, white, and gray, Brian Fippinger's color blindness had abruptly vanished. She goes now into the narrative. Normally, color blindness is a fixed trait, so how on earth did this extraordinary event come to pass? To answer that, we're going to enlist the help of scientists, psychologists, and philosophers, and we'll begin by laying down a few simple but radical ideas. And she goes on. In daily life, we tend to think about the body in terms of appearance, athletic capacity, or, hopefully infrequently, medical issues. More often than not, we talk about the body as a machine and treat it as no more than a vehicle to get us into our next activity. She goes on in the next paragraph, but really, your body is the seat of a powerful intelligence that helps you navigate your most important experiences and relationships. In a very real sense, your body is your social and emotional sense organ. So as she goes on into chapter 1, she talks about Brian. Brian's story begins in the Oak Park Hospital in Chicago, where doctors battled to save both him and his mother from a life-threatening premature birth. A sickly child, he was in and out of the hospital often, spent 5 months of one school year hospitalized with tonsillitis and pneumonia. He says, "I went to 2 weeks of kindergarten, and they weren't consecutive." So she goes on and she talks about how the brain develops. She says, as the brain develops, it serves as a pattern detection instrument, seeking out behaviors that are vital for successful interaction with the world. We've been talking about that as the default network. And she goes on, through structural, chemical, and physical changes to the relevant neurons, it puts those patterns on autopilot. It hooks up the word dog with four-legged furry thing that barks, or some such. It connects the nerves in your arm with the muscles in your hand and fingers so you can reliably get that spoon to your mouth. It associates laughter with pleasure, or, in some sad cases, with humiliation. It's a highly adaptive process that helps us automate those behaviors that allow us to survive and thrive. And I would add, in the world as we have come to define it. All right, then she goes on, the process is highly adaptive. Our brains have been finely honed over millions of years of evolution to carefully attend to our social and emotional environment and quickly adopt and to always remember behaviors that help us optimize access to 3 essential nutrients: safety, connection, and respect. And she talks about other kinds of animals and how they develop it. And she talks about what's going on in the brain structure. And then it turns out that it's not just your brain that is your social and emotional sense organ. It's your entire body. She says because the body and brain are in rapid growth mode when we're young, a significant percentage of this social and emotional brain shaping takes place in our early life environment. And again, this is something on this show we talked about. And then she says, the timeline allows the brain to mature in a way that's uniquely well suited to its first environment. In our culture, we encourage this biobehavioral blind spots in order to keep people in alignment. She goes on to provide very, very specific examples of how to undo these spots and also to begin to bring the body and brain into alignment for a variety of successful activities and connections in the world. She has a long list of references. The book is about 300 pages long. She also has a very good index. And I think that if this is something you want to know more about, this is a very fine reference. Your body is your brain. by Amanda Blake, and it's available in all the usual places. Well, I have to say we are out of time for today. But remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there are links to archived past shows, along with the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon. And I know you'll have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.